How good is a 150-year-old sourdough starter? I wanted to find out, and I'm going to take you along in this video what I did, what I learned, and in the end, whether I thought it's actually worth having a 150-year-old heirloom sourdough starter. So stick around until the end. Here I have my two sourdough starters. In the left jar with the label, I have the heirloom starter, and I weighed the amount of starter that came in the mail in this little Ziploc bag and used the same weight of my own dehydrated sourdough starter in the other jar. And I'm just going by the instructions that came with the starter, and because there were quite a few, I condensed them down on a piece of paper to just give myself the cliff notes of what I need to do. Essentially, we're adding a little bit of flour and water to build the starter up, and I'm adding some fabrics on top and a rubber band around it to get the first day going. And because it's a cold house, I put them in my windowsill. I can't help myself but look at the starter the next day, but let's bring it over here where I can see a little bit better and where I can show you. There's very little bit activity which is expected at this stage in building the starter back up, rehydrating a sourdough starter. And if you're interested, I actually have an entire video about how you can dehydrate and rehydrate your own sourdough starter. Now, according to the instructions, I'm going to give it another round of feedings with the equal volume of flour and water. Usually I like to do weight, but the instructions said volume, so I just thought, you know what, I'll follow at least for the first day or two before I may decide to do something else. Stirring is always a really good idea because sourdough microbes like oxygen, and I'm going to use a different fork or wash my fork to make sure that I'm really not transferring microbes from one starter to the other, because I really want it just to be as much as an apples to apples experiment as possible. Now, because they're sitting next to each other, there might be a little bit of friendly jump over of microbes, but you know, you can only do as much as you can. And back to go to the windowsill where there's a sunny spot. So let's see what's happening here with my two sourdough starters. This one is the heirloom sourdough starter that looks actually really happy. I hope that you can see it. I'm trying to hold it into the camera. And here is my own that looks a lot more sluggish. I'm gonna hold the two next to each other. So there's a lot more bubbles in the heirloom starter and a lot less in my own. However, I have to say that I created my own maybe 2 years ago. So theoretically, they're really good forever, and probably not forever, but for a really long time. And I suspect that the fact that mine is 2 years older than this one is probably the reason why this is not quite as happy as I would like it to be. However, there's a slight sour smell to this one and a little less here. However, I do see some activity. Sounds hollow. And I'm just going to go ahead and feed it, and then we will come back tomorrow and see how it's doing. And today I want to do this with weight and not with volume. And they go back in the windowsill. So it's early in the morning the next day, and let's see what my sourdough starters are doing. First we'll look at the heirloom starter. It's actually risen quite a bit. It has a ton of bubbles. It looks really light and airy and bubbly on top, and has a good sour smell. Now to compare, this is my own sourdough starter. As you can see, it hasn't risen quite as much. It has good bubbles on top, very active, but it doesn't have quite as many bubbles on the inside. I think the reason for that is that this starter dehydrated is about 2 years old, so it may lose some of its potency, which actually means that you have to give it a little bit more TLC to get to the same point. What I'm really most interested in this point is less the activity of the starter, but actually how they turn out in the bread and if there is a difference. However, this experiment wasn't very accurate because I should have dehydrated my own starter and then used it right away and then do this comparison. So I am comparing apples to oranges a little bit here. What I'm going to do is put this one on my Sourdough Goldie. Let's check up on my own sourdough starter in the Sourdough Goldie. We'll bring it over to where the other sourdough starter is. Okay, so let's see what a little bit of warmth does to the sourdough starter. It has smaller holes, but again, I think I would expect that. And this one has reached its peak and it's deflated a little bit. However, I think it is still going to be good enough to bake with. I'm trying to think how I'm going to make this experiment as accurate as possible. I guess I will let these sit for a little bit and do a discard and another feeding tonight, and then when they are at peak I can bake with them tomorrow, and then we'll have two different breads to compare with. I think that's what I'm going to do. I have thoroughly preheated my two Dutch ovens. One is enameled and the other one is not, and one is just a tad bigger than the other, but I'm just doing the best I can with what I have. And to make it a little bit easier on the dough, I'm lining my cast iron skillets. This is the heirloom starter bread, and because it was a very wet and rainy day, my bread dough actually turned out a lot wetter and higher hydration than I had anticipated. So that's not necessarily ideal. And it just teaches me that I need to follow my intuition and feel for the dough a little bit more than going by the recipe. And I did add a little bit more flour, but I guess it wasn't quite enough. Scoring the top of the bread to help the rise, and I put the lids back on. Everything is really hot here. Put the breads back into the oven at, I think it's about 450 degrees for half an hour with lid. After half an hour, I'm going to remove the lid, and this is where we get the first little sneak peek into what these breads look like. Let's remove the proofing basket here because I need to put the hot lid somewhere. This is already looking pretty promising. Nice surface, nice top. It puffed up. Maybe not quite as much as I wanted to, but hey, this is a real life video and I only had one shot. And I'm taking you along, and you can see that I'm not perfect. I don't always get the breads that I would like to have. And anyhow, I'm just keeping going. Here is the bread after another half hour without the lid. And this is the heirloom bread. Now I'm just going to have to let them cool down on a wire rack, and it's always so tempting when the house smells really nice to want to cut the breads right when they come out of the oven, but they're still baking inside, and you're just going to destroy the bread more than anything else if you don't wait. Obviously these breads are a lot flatter than I would have liked them. However, I did have a very wet dough, and it was really hard to manage. Now I'm gonna cut these two breads. Remember, this is the one with the heirloom starter, and this is the one that I made with my starter. Again, it's not exactly fair because the Dutch oven for this one was a little bit bigger than the Dutch oven for this one, which is the reason why this one didn't quite rise as much. But we're gonna cut. So there's a lot going on here. It smells very good. And same thing here. It is has big holes up here, which I believe is a reason, is because it's flatter and wider. Now let's cut a slice. It's still a little bit warm, but you know how it is when you bake a fresh bread and you have that smell in your kitchen and you just can't resist trying it. So what do you think of the shape? Taste is amazing. I don't think I can taste the difference. Regardless of the fact that my breads weren't exactly the way I wanted them, they both tasted fantastic to me, and I couldn't really tell a difference. Now, I have a son who I like to say has a very sophisticated palate, and you know your kids are always really honest with you because there's no diplomacy, and they just tell you outright whether you nailed something or you absolutely failed at something. And he thought that actually my sourdough bread, the bread with my sourdough starter, was a little bit better than the one with the heirloom starter. Now I couldn't tell that difference, but like I said, he has his taste buds are a little bit more refined than mine. Now I want to say something before I tell you whether I think it's worth it, and that is that I absolutely love this book, Sourdough Culture. If you're a sourdough aficionado like I am, you are gonna love this book. And in it, the author also has an heirloom starter that's supposedly 150 years old, and it has a name, and he sets out to find out whether he can actually trace it back. But he not only does that, he gives you a really good overview of the history of sourdough. It's a really interesting book. And in the end, he basically says that you cannot reliably prove that your sourdough starter is in fact 150 years old. I know, maybe spoiler here for the book, but it's still such a worthwhile read. Now, in terms of my own sourdough starter, do I think it's worth having a 150-year-old sourdough starter? And by the way, if you're interested in finding out where to get this particular sourdough starter, I'm going to leave the link for you below. And I highly encourage you to make a donation. This is a endeavor that is run by volunteers. They use their own time, they use their own flour, they drive to the post office. Now you send in a self-addressed and stamped envelope. However, you know, they're using their time and their own flour, and I made a donation because I think I want to keep their thing going and make it accessible to anyone. So I highly recommend that you think about making a donation to them as well. Just put a little check in your envelope with a little bit of money. Since I didn't taste a difference, and knowing that after so many feedings and using my sourdough starter, it really adapts more to the flour that I'm using and to my environment here, the microbial makeup of my house and my kitchen and my area, I still think it's kind of neat to think that there is something that's alive after 150 years old and there is a continuous history. And while I don't think that you can actually taste big enough of a difference that you say, oh my gosh, this is so much better than that, and that bread tastes a lot better than the bread that's made with a starter that's only a few years old. It's almost like having an heirloom, an antique, and just knowing that the starter may be 150 years or more old. And I think it's just more of a mental thing. And I actually merged my sourdough starters because they would have done that anyways, because of the flour that I use and because of my climate here and my environment and everything that's swirling around in my kitchen. So yes, so I think it's kind of neat to have a 150-year-old sourdough starter, and I will just keep this going. This is a little bit dormant in my refrigerator right now because I just made a good bread, and I'm going to wait until I bake something else. Well, thank you so much. Let me know if you have any questions. Leave me a comment below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.